The rent trap. You guys have probably heard it before, and some of you, unfortunately, are probably stuck in it. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you what it really means. I'm even going to explain how it came about that so many of us are stuck in the rent trap. And then finally, I'm going to give some practical solutions that you can use to bust out of the rent trap. You've probably heard the term generation rent. It's basically used to describe most people in the Western culture who were born from the 1980s onwards and are locked out of home ownership. Now, what's really weird about this is when you look at all these cultures, is that home ownership is such a core value within it. If you think about the American dream, you've got the Australian dream, the Kiwi way, it all revolves around home ownership. And statistics say that when you have a high percentage of the nation's people who own their own homes, they're wealthier and they're happier. So if it's such a major important part of all of our cultures, what the bloody hell happened? Now to answer that, we're going to have to rewind back to the 1970s, where there was two major things that happened. The first was the global deregulation of the banking industry. And the second started with President Nixon removing the dollar from the gold standard, which created ripples into all the other currencies doing the same. What led on from that was a massive increase in consumerism. As suddenly people had money to go out and buy these holidays they couldn't afford, to upgrade to a flashier car, to go on a shopping spree and just put it all on their credit card. Suddenly, it became normal to be in debt. We had gone from our grandparents' prudent mindset of saving until you could afford to buy it, to the I want it now generation that we are today. So, the second thing to happen was house prices skyrocketed. Now, inflation is normal, but not this sort of inflation. If you check out the first 70 years of the 1900s, it's roughly the same. Deregulate the banks, and shit gets crazy. What makes this even worse is when you look at how the lowest quintile of the population have had their annual salaries increase. And you can see why so many people can no longer afford to buy their own home. So what can we do about this? Not much. There is not much we can do to solve the fiat currency problem. But what I can do is I can give you some strategies in order to help yourself out to get through the rent trap and to get into home ownership or buy an investment property today. So the first thing you really need to understand is that when it comes to owning property, nobody owns property. In most countries around the world, the only people who own that land are either the government or the native indigenous people. As soon as you understand that, you can explode your opportunities so much more. Because when you supposedly own property, what you actually own is a title or a deed to control that piece of land. And the key word in what I just said was control. So once you understand that it's rephrasing the question, not how can I own a property, but into what is the best strategy in order for me to control a property, then the answers are limitless. Look, the best way for you to control a piece of property is still to get a traditional mortgage. Now, if you want to go to the bank, they're going to look for two things. The first is a deposit. That is how much of your own money you can bring to the table. The second is serviceability. Obviously, the bank wants to know whether you can repay that loan or not. Now, because it only took a global financial crisis for the banks to realise that lending 110% of a property's value to people who couldn't afford to repay it was a really stupid idea, The banks have tightened up their belts and they're making lending a lot more difficult. Now, as a property investor, I've been declined so many times for finance that it's easier for me just to not even bother going through them anymore. I don't want to waste my time ticking banks' boxes when I could use any of these additional strategies in order to control the property, and it's so much easier. So, what strategies can you use? Well, first of all, turn your weakness into a strength. If you get declined because you do not have a big enough deposit, you can do something called a lease option. Now, this is often referred to as a rent-a-buy. You take out a lease on a property for a certain amount of time, and you have the option to purchase it at any time within that period. How can you use this in order to get more deposit? Well, you might have the right in order to renovate that property and increase the value. You also have the right to any capital gains that that property gets during that period. Another strategy is called an installment contract, which is very similar to a lease option, but it's more like a hire purchase. So it is a definite sale, but instead of going through the bank, you're just buying it directly from the owner. You pay it off in little installments and you pay them interest, and you can bypass the bank directly. But my favourite way, and I've done this multiple times, is where you actually get the property and you control it. You add value to that property through a renovation or refurbishment, and the increase in perceived value and actual cost is instant equity. You just created a deposit out of thin air. How cool is that? Now, let's say you're stuck on serviceability. Maybe you're self-employed, maybe you're a new immigrant, whatever, you just don't tick one of the bank's boxes. That's absolutely no problem too. Whilst all these strategies would work for you as well, another way is to get a guarantee. Whether it's your parent, family member, boss, friend, they can actually come to the bank and guarantee that if you do not pay your loan, they will pay it for you. Yeah, that is a bit of a risk on their side, but you're going to have a side agreement saying that if you stop paying, they get control of the property. It's all about control. Now, let's say you're really stuck in a difficult situation. You've got no deposit and no serviceability. What options might you have then? Here's an idea. What if you were to get together with a couple of your mates, let's say 10, 20 people, and you were all to chip in, let's say, 3,000 euros. And you were to get a nice, cheap property somewhere nice, probably somewhere in the sun. Valencia would be cool, right? And you were able to control that property. And you know the stupid thing about this, how great it is? When we did the numbers on it, because we're actually doing this deal, when we did the numbers on it at full occupancy, if you were to go stay in that property, it would cost you €2 per night. I can tell you that's a whole lot better than renting where I come from. So if you're still stuck, look, you've got to think out the box. How can I make this happen? So there's a fantastic website, and you should all be writing this down. Those with a computer, you can go there now. Okay? www.google.com. And when I Googled how to buy a property with no deposit, I had 5,400,000 results pop up. So I'm going to go ahead and say one of those websites are probably going to help you out. So, yeah, it is possible. All you have to do is just think, how can I make it happen? I really want to finish you with one of my favourite quotes, and seriously, this changed my life. This can change your life too. It came from a property mentor of mine. Yes, he is Australian, but I love him anyway. It simply goes, don't tell me what you can't do, tell me what you can do. Thanks, guys.